fight and expect to win. Gotta go harder. Oh, you've gotta learn. Don't suppress your fire, baby, let it burn. Be who you are. Nobody can take that.
Welcome to the Feminist Foreign Policy side event, Breaking the Silos. You are welcomed by Oxfam, NoVIP, Mercy Corps and Women Equals Men Dutch Gender Platform in cooperation with the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. My name is Devi Kepi, I'm with Women Equals Men Dutch Gender Platform and I'll be your moderator for today. So the topic we're going to discuss today is the nexus between climate change, gender and conflict. And we believe that these issues are intrinsically linked. However, in most cases, international policies address these issues in silo. Climate change and climate crisis and gender and peace and security agendas should be linked. This is essential for better climate change solutions. So today we will address the nexus between climate change, conflict and gender in our panel discussion. And in the second part, we will look into how and if a feminist foreign policy could contribute to breaking these silos, especially when it comes to policies addressing the three elements. We have a very rich program today with speakers from around the world, and we would also like to engage you. So I'd like to remind you that the chat box in the Zoom is open during the whole session. The only question I would like to ask you is to keep it friendly and respectful. I'm in the studio and I am joined by two other people who I'd like to introduce. So first we move on to Annika on my right.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Annika Snel. I am the political coordinator at Women Equals Men Dutch Gender Platform. And I am also your moderator for today, but mainly for the second block of this session and all of our online interactions. I am looking at the chat as we speak, and well, we are very curious to your thoughts, your insights and your questions. So I hope to see you there.
All right, we are also joined by Willemijn, who is our illustrator for today.
Hi everyone, I'm Willemijn Lambert and I'll be making a visual summary of today's event. So visualizing the main points, the main takeaways, and we'll come back to the drawing at the end of the session.
Great. Thank you, Willemijn. All right, before we start with the content of the program, I'd like to give the floor to Sheena Anderson from the Center of Feminist Foreign Policy.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Sheena Anderson. I am a project manager at the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. We are a research, advocacy, and consulting organization based in Berlin, working to bring an intersectional feminist approach to foreign policy worldwide. Today, we are delighted to welcome you to this official side event in our summit season, a whole calendar of events leading up to the first ever Feminist Foreign Policy Summit on the 13th of April here in Berlin. The summit will be co-hosted by the governments of Canada, Sweden, and Mexico, the Open Society Foundations, and over 15 civil society organizations, and it will constitute an opportunity to bring together the leading thinkers and practitioners in the field of feminist foreign policy to, first, support the exchange of best practices, knowledge, and expertise. Second, support advocacy efforts for the uptake of feminist foreign policy among new actors. And third, to take a stand against global inequality and exclusion. During the event, our various panels will cover topics such as climate justice, demilitarization and disarmament, understanding and countering the transnational anti-gender campaigns, decolonizing feminist foreign policy or foreign policy in general, and much more. Although in-person participation on the day will be limited, there is also an opportunity to join us virtually. All of the details about our side events and the summit, including information on how to register for virtual participation, can be found on our website, but I will also make sure to drop the link in the chat here. So for this event, Breaking the Silos, why international policies should link climate, gender, and conflict, we are so pleased to be partnering with Women, Oxfam, and Mercy Corps. As an intersectional feminist organization committed to the needs of the most marginalized, but also for me personally being responsible for our climate justice program, but also being a marginalized climate activist myself, this event and the topic discussed are particularly dear to our hearts, as we are constantly highlighting the importance to think the climate crisis, conflict, and gender, or more broadly, intersectionality together. We think feminist foreign policy can be a tool in achieving such a holistic perspective, and I'm excited to hear what this event will teach us about that. And having said that, over to you, Debbie.
Thank you very much, Sheena, and thank you for your continuous work on for people in marginalized positions. Thank you very much. I would now like to move on to our first speaker, Leila Bedhoum. She is a policy advocacy and communications manager for Oxfam in Iraq. They have recently published a research paper that is highly relevant for this event, and we're going to listen to Leila now. You can take the floor.
Thank you, Davy, and thank you for having me today. I have a small presentation today to talk about our recent report that is talking about climate change and its impact on rural communities in Iraq. The paper is talking about the impact on livelihoods, but at the same time connecting it to immigration and to civil unrest in Iraq. Just to make sure that we have the presentation online for everyone to see. So yes, we do. Thank you very much. And maybe to start with saying a general background information, and I'm talking now today when I have a sandstorm in the back where Iraq has been seeing severe weather deterioration in the last period. So the humanitarian situation in Iraq is fragile even after 5 years of the end of operation against the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, and operation. And the country has been affected by decades of conflict and violence and displacement. The situation is becoming more protracted than before, and also there's a lot of economic deterioration happening. In the last 2 years, the country has been affected by double shock when it comes to COVID-19 and the drop in oil prices, which really affected the government ability to meet the demands at the level of the community. Also, Iraq is affected by a protracted displacement crisis with large numbers of refugees or incomplete housing, and there is still a number of IDPs, internally displaced people and refugees in the country. On top of that, Iraq is facing a severe water crisis shaped by many factors, including rising temperature, cyclical droughts, and declining rainfall. And this has really been really affecting the communities. In addition to that, Iraq is one of the countries that is affected by the policies of neighboring countries, where the building of dams and water harvesting is affecting Iraq's share of their water. In the second slide, we will be talking about the research of the recent policy brief that we have published, which is called, as you see from the screen, Unfarmed Now, Uninhibited Now. The selection of the name was an indication about how farming and agriculture is a major and important sector for Iraq economy. And when we have this sector affected by different factors, then the question of how many years will be long until the farmers are really severely affected. We wanted to analyze the impact on rural communities and farmers, female and women and male farmers, but at the same time to really use the analysis to unpack the situation and see the correlation with migration from rural areas to urban areas, and also connect this with the civil unrest that we have been witnessing in the last years with Iraq, have been witnessing lots of demonstrations calling for the government to answer the need to have provision of services and effective provision of services. To give you more information in the next slide, we will be talking about the agriculture overall, or the agriculture sector in Iraq. So Iraq is an agricultural country, and they practice mainly rain-fed agriculture, and they are focusing in particular grain production and livestock production. And there is a considerable amount of the land dependent on irrigation. And when we say irrigation, it means dependent on the country's two main rivers and underground water. Now, while the agriculture sector has a very small contribution to the overall domestic GDP of the country, which is 5%, it is a vital percentage, and it is the second largest after the oil contribution of the oil sector. And now, strategically, agriculture is important for the country for the production of its food basket and also for providing income for millions of Iraqis. And data shows that around 19% of active workforce are within the agriculture sector. From that, almost 24% are women. Last winter, the Iraqi government announced that they will be only supporting 50% of the land that are farmed and using irrigation water. This comes as a direct result of water scarcity, which means farmers are left behind without support from the government to farm their lands. And overall, Iraq is the fifth most vulnerable country to climate change and rise in temperature. And farmers, especially female farmers, are among the most affected groups. The next slide will be talking about some of the main findings that we have received from the study, and any picture you will be seeing today, they are pictures that have been taken in the last 5 months in Iraq, where we have been to the communities meeting Iraqi farmers. So when we talk to farmers, and this means that we have talked to a big number of female and male farmers about how they see the challenges affecting their livelihoods, affecting the sector. And they talked a lot about the impact of no access to finance and access to agricultural inputs. And we talk about no access to finance, we are talking about farmers who have lost their assets and their lands due to conflict, especially in the last 8 to 10 years. And they are unable to build their resilience because they don't have enough support, especially from the government. And when we talk about agriculture inputs, it means farmers don't have the support for seeds, for irrigation systems, for finance that's needed for them to start the season. And another major factor that was established was the impact of climate change and drought. And when farmers don't have access to water, as simple as they cannot farm their lands, and farmers who are far away from the open area or open service water resources like rivers are the most affected. And when we say they don't have access to finance, it means they cannot even dig water wells to extract underground waters. So it means they cannot start the season. Another main challenge they have been facing was the market and the fluctuation in prices. And this was because of the competition of imported products from neighboring country, where the cost of production is less than the cost of production in Iraq, which means the prices are lower and the customer are going to the imported products. When we analyze, this is in a nutshell what the main challenges facing farmers. And when we were analyzing the data, there was a number of words that has been repeated all the time from different areas. We have been to 7 governorates, and it was conflict, no stability, climate change and drought, and lack of support and resources. This is either from the government side or from the international and national actors like international NGOs and national NGOs. The impact on farmers, and this is including female and male farmers, is severe to the point that sometimes farmers are reducing their production only for their household level, which means they have a lack of income coming to their household, means that they cannot really continue with their life. And some of them are turning to negative coping mechanism, like either farming on debt or sending their children to work or reducing the workload or increasing the workload for women within the household. The impact of women is we're going to be focusing on later on, so I'll continue to impact on children. With children, we have seen lots of children going to work and leaving schools in order to support their family income resources. Also, we are seeing lack of farmers' voices and representation within decision making. We are seeing the disconnection between farmers on the land and between the government in Baghdad. Even at the local government level, we are seeing this disconnection where decisions are made in Baghdad without proper representation of the groups that are most affected. The overall impact, the agriculture sector, as we have said, is really important for the Iraq economy. And this means that without having this without having this sector developing, there's a big loss for the workforce and also for the country's food basket. And then the increase of prices where people will not be able to access food from the local markets. And overall, we are seeing lots of trends of migration from rural to urban communities in order to find more stable job opportunities. And this means agricultural lands are being deserted. This means that we are losing green spaces, but also it means this is increasing pressure on cities and urban areas to provide services and improve the condition for their residents. In the second slide, we will be focusing about impact on women. And when we talk about the impact of women, this comes from the perspective of female farmers who are either landowners or working in their family's farmlands, or even working within the sector. Now, the customs and norms of Iraq reduce the workload of females or women in only specific sectors that are considered to be suitable for their gender, such as the agriculture sector. And this is where we see most of the female workers in the rural areas. But most of the women who are participating in agriculture are actually working in their families' farms, and there is less women who are owning farmlands, less women who are actually the owner of the business. Women's work in agriculture is often regarded as an extension of their household work, and they are not usually paid for. And this is an extra layer they are receiving of pressure. Many female farmers also reported that they mainly perform the more physical aspect of agriculture, while men are engaged more in marketing and produce consultations and obtaining the supplies they need. And this is something we have seen throughout the research, where women were really absent from decision making, absent from planning. They were only present within the physical work of the agricultural sector. Now moving to the second slide, also to continue talking about the impact on female farmers. Many of the female farmers that we have met also said that they might be sometimes consulted in decision making, but but they are never the decision maker. They are never the person who's able to make the decision on either what to farm this year, what crop to farm, how to sell the crops, in which markets, what is the size of the land that will be produced, what to do with the income and the savings. All these decisions are something where females are not part of, and this is only that the male member of the household will be taken. Now, even with the female-headed households, we have seen in some areas where farmers say for the female-headed households, it's a male member from the family that can be the brother or the son who will be going to the market to talk to the suppliers, or even make decisions for selling the product. In some cases, the female will be doing that, but this is not the majority. This is just a small percentage of who we have met. Also, we were talking a lot about farmers' lack of support, and this means that farmers are not receiving extension services where they are advised by how to farm and how to mitigate the situation, the weather situation or the drought situation, a service that usually the government provides through visitings and field visits and consultation meetings, something also found within the community where farmers group together and exchange the knowledge and exchange the talks about the challenges they are facing. In all these spaces, there is no female participation, and this is something absence in that sense. And even when it comes to migration and impact of drought, females will be the most affected, because in case of migration, they will be losing their social networks, and this means that they will not be able to find jobs in the new communities they are relocated at. Or if the male member of the family is migrating, it means that they will be responsible for the household responsibilities. My final slide, if I can go please to the slide next to the last one. Yes, please. Yes. So this is just an overview of the people who we have met during the data collection process. And overall, we have met, as you see from the left, female farmers and male farmers. In the right, we have met a number of directorates, number of structural and systems, and the people who are part of the decision making. We have done 25 KIIs, 25 key informant interviews. If we can go to the last slide, please, you will see out of the 25, only 3 females were present. And they were present in the INGOs, 2 of them, and 1 of them in the Directorate of Agriculture. Every single space we have been to, it was only male dominated and women were not present. So down the whole chain, female were really absent throughout the process. Thank you. And back to you, Davey.
Thank you very much, Leila. I recommend everyone to read the paper because this explains the nexus actually in practice. So thank you very much for that insightful presentation. I have one more question related to the last part that you mentioned about the women missing in decision-making processes. And I read from the paper, one of the recommendations was encourage greater engagement by women in decision-making processes and help challenge social norms that define women's role in the agricultural sector. Could you please give an example of a social norm that needs to be challenged according to what you've seen and what you've heard?
Yeah. I think it's really important to focus about the community's perception about the woman's role and in their community, in the household. And this is something that is expected for women to be at the receiving side of it, of the decision making. Usually women from the beginning at the household level are not part of the decision making. And this is reflecting when you zoom out at the community level, where the spaces of decision making is not female friendly, is not welcoming, and with women presence is not taken easy. It needs lots of strength and convincing for them to be accepting women in that space. And this starts by the fact that women are not capable to do that. They didn't have enough information, and also that this is not their role, where even some women, they were accepting the fact this is the role of men because they are always outside responsible for the household. And I just want to also zoom out to the fact that overall environment of the country is not also allowing women to have an effective role in decision making, because if you look at the women political participation, it's something that has been absent in Iraq. And even with some female becoming a member of the parliaments recently, they don't have an effective role in decision making. Now, if you put that to address the issue of climate change and drought, one of our recommendations is to have a national plan for mitigation and adaptation. This plan is done by decision makers, and most likely they are not female present during the designing of such plan. So that's why we need to challenge from the household level up to the political participation to make sure that everything is gender inclusive, but at the same time gender sensitive, to ensure the needs and the special needs of women in the society.
Thank you, Lily. Very important points raised there. We have a few questions online, but due to time, we won't be able to ask them all. So I'd like to ask Annika if you could pick one of the questions that was asked by the participants.
Oh, what a horrible thing to make me responsible for selecting the questions. Well, for those, if we do not ask your questions, we'll make sure they get back to the speakers of today. Well, all right. I would like to ask you a question raised by Sabina, which is, do women work in commercial farming and in international chains? I'm sorry.
Not as much as they should be. They are usually at the production level of the chain where they are producing, and then they are really behind the closed doors. When it comes to continue to the next aspect of the chain, this is where male domination takes place, and this is where women are not doing the marketing, the negotiation, and taking part of that aspect of it. And even in some level, when there's some international organizations trying to establish small businesses for women, the problem with that is that the whole environment that holds these entities is not friendly, is not accommodating to the needs of women, and not making sure that they create in spaces. So there's this connection even from the individual level up to the overall level of the community. I hope this answers the question, but definitely not as much as we should be seeing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leila. I think we can speak for an hour, but we need to move on to our next section because we have a very interesting panel. I'm joined now by, if it's possible, I'm joined now by Hadil Kazaz, who's the MENA Regional Gender Coordinator at Oxfam. I'm also joined by Lovena Akinyi-Owor. She's the Gender and Youth Advisor at Mercy Corps, based in Karamoja region in Uganda. I am also joined by Emma Whittaker, Peace and Conflict Advisor at Mercy Corps, and last but not least, Amr Abdelmohamed, who's a Conflict Sensitivity Policy Advisor at Oxfam Novib. Welcome to you all. I'd like to ask a first question to Hadil, and that is a very general question, but just wondering, why do you think it's important to focus on the nexus between climate change, conflict, and gender? at the moment, but maybe we can quickly switch to Willemijn with the drawing. Oh,
coming back soon.
Okay. I'm trying to. Apologies for the technical glitches.
Sorry, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So I was appointed as a moderator, I understand.
Apologies,
Okay.
Adil. We are.
We hopefully we'll get our moderators very soon. But in the meantime, can we move to the next speaker? And actually, this session was supposed to be more of a panel, where we will share experiences and talk about what's happening. So let me just pull up the plan.
All right. Well, then we see if we have Lovena on the call. Lovena, if you are here, could you please give an answer to the question on why it's important to focus on the nexus from your perspective?
I think you're muted.
I'm muted.
No, Devi.
Devi,
Yes. Just
you are
checking if
muted.
you're able to hear
Can you
me.
unmute?
Yes. All right. Yes, apologies for the technical glitches. Lovena, would you like to respond to the question on why it's important to focus on the nexus?
Yes, please. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So my name is Lovena Owur. I'm Gender and Youth Advisor for Masiko in Apollo program that is based in Karamoja, Northern Uganda. So the intersectionality between climate change, security, or insecurity for that matter, and gender cannot actually be underestimated. And from what Leila has just shared with us, it's indicative that it destabilizes political, social, and economic systems. And from the context of Karamoja, where I work, and where Masiko has a very huge presence, women bear the brunt of this. When it undermines food security, it contributes to poor livelihoods. And remember, it's women who are putting food on the table. So evidence from the grassroots, have it that women are actually the main actors in peace and natural resource management. So when I say the main actors in peace, Karamoja the context of Karamoja is a post-conflict one. So women participate in structures that we call peace committees. So that is positive because they actually contribute to peace. And then the other aspect of it is that women also are also warriors. They cook food for people who are involved in conflict. So they can contribute negatively and also positively. And those two factors cannot be undermined. They have to be looked at critically, and women's involvement and inclusion has to be very deliberate, for this in the nexus that we are discussing. Then in terms of natural resource management, again, in the context of Karamoja, Uganda, and mainly the entire East African, sub-Saharan Africa, men own the land, women plant trees, but they don't own those trees that they plant. At the same time, women are expected to put food on the table. So what do? They have to cut the trees that have been planted to harvest wood fuel. So there's massive, they contribute to massive environmental degradation. And that has a bearing on climate. So when all these resources are depleted, water sources, people encroach into other communities, which contributes to conflict, and women actually end up bearing the brunt of it. So this is really a very passionate topic. The intersectionality between climate change, gender, and also security or conflict. But then more so, if I may go back to Leila's piece on women and farming. In Karamoja and in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, where food for peace interventions are being implemented mainly, you find that land is owned by men, women work on the land. So being pastoralist communities, when women are working on the land, men have gone out looking for pasture. They do the planting, they do the weeding. When it comes to harvesting, the men come. And when they come, because they're the owners of land, they actually take control of everything. So that then the ownership shifts from women to men. Same to livestock sector, where we as development actors or humanitarian assistance actors, we may have very good intentions where we want to empower women, maybe buying for them livestock because we feel that those are high valued assets that can actually empower them more quickly economically. But we end up missing the link. We don't look at the whole production or market chain of the livestock. When they buy this, we buy for them this livestock, be it goats or be it cattle. Who takes care of these animals and where, on whose land are they taken care of? At the end of it all, after a complete fattening process happens and the livestock is supposed to be taken to the market so that it can generate income for use in the household, then women are literally left out because they are not active participants in the market. The markets are male dominated. So this affects, it actually disempowers the women, looking at how they have, struggled to ensure that there's water for this livestock or water within the farms, owing to the changing climatic factors. And then at the end of it, all these interventions, the whole setup shifts. Yeah. So those are really areas that we need to look at.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Over to you, David. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Lovena. And I think you stress a few very interesting points in your answer. And I think one of the main messages is also that when we talk about the nexus, an easy pitfall is to see women as victims only. Whereas what you just said, women can also be agents of change or are agents of change. So thank you very much, Lovena. I would also like to go to Emma right now. Emma is from Mercy Corps to focus a bit on what the role is of the organization. So Emma, I'd like to ask you, what can we learn from Mercy Corps when we speak about the nexus, and what do you see as main challenges for merging these agendas?
It's great to be here today and with all of you, and especially with my colleague Lovena, who's in our Uganda office. So for those who don't know, just briefly, and we're a global humanitarian development and peace building organization. It works in about 40 countries around the world, and primarily in those that are characterized by conflict and fragility. And so I would co-lead our...
Sorry to interrupt you, Emma. I now notice that the audio is not completely right. I'm wondering whether that could be a setting on your side, just to check.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes, much better. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying that Mercy Corps is a global humanitarian peace building and development organization in about 40 countries around the world, primarily countries that are characterized by fragility. So I co-lead our climate change and conflict course, and it's a specific area of focus Mercy Corps has been doing research and programming on since 2018, building on sort of more than 10 years of experience on climate, environment, conflict, and as well as our sort of global resilience thinking. So in terms of sort of what we can say about this nexus, we're already seeing that climate change is destabilizing economies. It's rapidly fueling insecurity. crippling agricultural productivity, and it's weakening social institutions.
Thank you for that last sentence. Sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we lost you for that last sentence. Could you please repeat it again? Repeat it again. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and that climate change is crippling agricultural productivity and weakening social institutions. We know that increasing weather and climate extremes have exposed millions around the world to acute food and water insecurity. And we see that the largest impacts are observed in communities across Africa, Asia, Central America, small islands, and the Arctic. And while we know the implications of climate change are as complex as they are scary, it's a very simple truth that the impacts have not and will not be felt equally. So the most impacted by climate change are those least responsible for the crises, and those that have it's really those that have been traditionally marginalized, excluded, and oppressed throughout society. We also know, unfortunately, that the context where the threats of climate change and conflict converge, those contexts characterized by fragility, low socioeconomic development, high inequality, are also receiving the least climate finance support. And so with limited opportunities for adaptation, these stressors can in turn further exacerbate prevailing gender norms and power structures, which really limit the ability of various groups to manage and recover in the face of these shocks. So to effectively address climate-related security risks, we really need to focus on understanding how individuals and identity groups are systematically marginalized within sort of social and economic systems, and what impact that has on their resilience, both climate change and conflict, and that really has to be at the core of any approach. So understanding how and why these different groups are affected by shocks and stresses because of certain factors like age, gender, ethnicity, displacement status, wealth, mobility, or geography will really allow us to sort of elevate entry points to address climate security risks for everybody. And so matching that understanding with appropriate financing instruments is really what we need to action change and to support communities to avoid sort of the worst climate-induced conflict outcomes. And finally, that understanding of those system dynamics can also shed light on how to address prevailing harmful norms and structures that can also bring traditionally marginalized groups into decision-making positions to collectively address climate security threats for all. And I think that relates back to what Leila was saying about, traditionally women being excluded from those decision-making positions and corridors of power. And so that's sort of how we focus our work on climate and conflict. And I'll just really briefly touch on sort of two challenges we see in merging these agendas. And the first is really that many organizations, whether practitioner or sort of donor side, aren't really set up to work cross-thematically. And it really requires a sector-neutral approach to sort of understanding and reframing how we look at the challenges that communities in fragile contexts are facing. So it's really a sort of about working with across themes and across silos to work holistically on the challenges that are sustaining fragility. And the second real challenge that we see that we're working to address is on connecting and conceptualizing climate change and conflict itself. And that's really around developing locally rooted, sort of locally informed connections between climate change and conflict, and a lack of tools to sort of help communities and help practitioners link these two factors in order to inform action. That's something we're actually working on, is to develop a tool that we can share with the broader practitioner community to help communities and actors in this space look and understand these connections to inform interventions for future action. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you for elaborating on the inspiring work you already do on the nexus. And I think the challenges that you mentioned about how we are not set up to work beyond the silos. I hope in the second part we will get some clear recommendations on how we could do that. Thank you very much. I'd like to go over to Amr, who's the conflict sensitivity advisor for Oxfam. Actually with the same question. We've now heard from Mercy Corps. I wondered how Oxfam NoVIP addresses the nexus and what are the challenges you encounter, whether there are similarities with what we've just heard. Let's see, do we have Amr on the call? Yes. Hi, Amr. Good
Yeah,
to see you.
thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. All right. I will try to set the scene of the operational context where Oxfam is working along three aspects that my colleague also alluded to. And the first aspect is the conflict and fragility. And as we all know, the number of the violent conflict around the world is on the rise again. And by 2030, perhaps up to 2/3 of the world's most extreme poor could be living in fragile and conflict-affected settings. And 60% of the conflicts are recurrent because we are dealing with symptoms and not necessarily addressing root causes. And those root causes are the inequality, exclusion, and injustice. The second aspect is the climate change, which is a risk multiplier in fragile and conflict context that compound vulnerabilities, inequalities, and climate change exacerbate already pre-existing socioeconomic issues that would lead to social tension and violence and displacement. And the world's 15 most vulnerable countries to the climate change are all either in a state of conflict or high fragility. And the third aspect is the gender impact of all this. In this context, the impact of climate change are gender. Women, young girls are disproportionately affected by conflict and face increased risk. These gender impacts mean increased level of inequality, harmful gender norms, as Emma alluded to, are perpetuated, and women-led climate change adaptation initiatives and measures are not leveraged to the maximum, which hinders the successful adaptation and resilient effort that we're all engaged in. So we need to address these three elements in a systematic and a joint manner. So taking together, this had led us to the need of an integrated triple nexus approach that is transformative, prevention focused, that links humanitarian development and peace building initiative to address these root causes and ensure conflict-sensitive programming. How we will do that is by strengthening local capacity toward building resilience, mainstreaming and building capacity for gender and climate-sensitive conflict analysis, because addressing root causes effort could fail due to the failure of analyzing conflict dynamics or adapting to the changing circumstances. And last but not least, since we also have an illustrator, we have this illustration and think of it as three gears. The first one, if it's operated correctly, the first gear is the conflict sensitive, and it operates and activated in our humanitarian and development programs. We will have more opportunities for peace building and conflict transformation in our work, which will strengthen the third and final gear, which is the triple nexus approach, and operationalize it in practice. Of course, there are challenges regarding that, and first one I can talk about is the funding. We need to ensure flexible and sustainable funding for local communities and women-led climate initiative in fragile and conflict-affected states. And of course, financing generally on adaptation in conflict-affected settings is much less than it should be. Thank you. Over. Back to you.
Thank you, Amr. And while you're still on the call, I'd like to follow up on something you just mentioned about funding, but also about how you approach conflict-sensitive programming. Because what we often see is that also funding is mostly centered to either focusing on the urgency of the crisis, so humanitarian help, but we also, as you mentioned, need to focus on the underlying root causes of the crisis. I wonder, how do you do that as an organization? How do you make sure that you're not only donor-driven, but that you tackle the issues in a holistic way? If you have any.
Yeah, of course. So our building block with regards to operationalizing the triple nexus. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Now we can.
Okay, I assume.
Okay, yeah.
All right. So as we are committed to the triple nexus, and which responds to an emergency need, but at the same time addressing things for the long term, and we also realizing that the climate and gender and conflict nexus is critical to peace building and resilient efforts. So we are doubling down on the localization effort and shifting power to our local partners as a means to empower communities to be able to contribute to the decision-making process regarding adaptation to climate change, and also underlying the root causes, or addressing the inequalities that contribute to conflict and exacerbating those issues. We are investing heavily in enhancing local capacity in mainstreaming gender and climate-sensitive conflict sensitivity lens in all our programs. And the building block, as I mentioned earlier, is the joint analysis that is participatory, as consultative and inclusive as possible, and continuous and ongoing joint analysis with local partners and local communities.
Great, thank you. And I think that's a learning point for all international organizations. Just wanted to check if Emma is still on the call. Emma, how do you proceed in working in a holistic way without being donor-driven? Do you have any strategies for that as well?
Yeah.
I'm afraid we are not able to hear you. Just checking if the sound can work. Yes. Could you commence?
Yeah. Am I coming in?
Perfect.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thanks. So how we work at Mercy Corps to sort of avoid silos is we really use what we call a resilience lens. And this is about understanding sort of the multiplicity of factors that impact fragility for given communities or groups. And beyond that, we understand conflict really as a system, and recognizing that there's no direct sort of starting point or end point, but rather that conflict is produced as a complex layers of relationships, of triggers, of different outcomes, and more importantly, that these factors can impact and be impacted by different social and gendered practices. So with reference to sort of gender specifically, we have, standards, global standards on inclusion of gender across all of our work, as well as many sort of standalone gender-focused programs. But it is something we're actively seeking to do better in, and to ensure really that all of our work, all of our programs is gender transformational. And so one sort of specific way on the climate conflict gender nexus that we're supporting donors and other actors to tackle these issues holistically is by growing the evidence base around climate change and conflict. So by focusing on sort of, programming and through research, we're focusing on, exploratory, evaluative, and policy research that can sort of fill the gaps of what's missing in this space for the moment. And so through this work, we're really learning more about the connections between climate and conflict and gender dynamics, as well as what works, and really focusing on how to sort of demonstrate why urgent action is needed to avoid, future worst case scenarios, and avoid the continued or increasing sort of oppression and marginalization of different groups. And sort of what we're finding from that so far, and this is, relates a lot to what Layla had said in the recommendations from their paper, is that, we have to both work on addressing urgent priority needs while contributing and working and looking at the sort of longer term and root causes of crises. And for Mercy Corps, we look at those as sort of the factors that are driving fragility. And we have to do that in a way that promotes long-term resilience. So understanding how our current responses to urgent needs isn't undermining local sources of resilience and its powers to adapt, but really sort of supporting communities to scale up the resilience skills and resources that they currently have, to plan to sort of adapt, withstand, and mitigate future shocks and stresses, both climate and conflict related. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. And I think it's interesting to see that link between humanitarian action versus support of long-term resilience. Thank you for that. I noticed that there are a few questions coming in online, and I believe there was a question for Lovena. Annika, could I give you the floor to ask that question to Lovena?
Yes, thank you very much. This question is from Lina And Lena reflects in her question on what Lovena said about buying livestock, and is wondering what Lovena's opinion is on microfinance. She says there are supposed to be some upsides, but people are also often left with high interest rates and therefore debts. And well, Lovena, we are wondering, what is your perspective on this? Lovena on the call still.
Yes, on microfinance, we are basically encouraging more of what we call SILC, savings, internal and lending committees, where group members save within themselves, and then they are able to borrow from their pool of savings. That is because the interest rates at the banks, the commercial banks, is more of prohibitive. But in addition to that, for us in Karamoja, and I know in most programs that Mexico is implementing, there's a lot of collaboration with the local banks to provide lending or borrowing facilities at more accessible or more affordable interest rates. So there is a negotiation that happens at organization and bank level. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lovena. On another note, we have our illustrator who's been very busy working on the drawing. I was wondering, Willemijn, could you give us an update on the progress?
Sure.
Following it.
Sure. As you can see, it's right in progress. So bear with me on the lines. They are a bit sketchy still, but I do see some red threads. And pretty much here in the middle, I focused on the sentence, we're focusing on the symptoms and not on the root causes. I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. And then around that, you see some light bulbs with some recommendations, such as making platforms gender inclusive, that we heard coming from the example in Iraq, understand how and why certain groups are affected, and in a way, moving also to that below, working holistically and not programmatic. And that you can see also in the last point that was being made. So to work beyond silos, work with a different lens, work with a resilience lens. So I think that's good for now, right? I'll continue drawing.
Yes, thank you very much. And it makes my job a lot easier for summarizing the discussion. This also takes us to the second part of the session, where we will explore, as what we just discussed, whether a feminist foreign policy supports actually the issues that were raised. In the Netherlands, there's a lot of discussion about the feminist foreign policy, but so far, our government has not committed to implementing one. Amr is based in the Netherlands, the only speaker who's based in the Netherlands, and I just wanted to ask you, do you think that the Netherlands should have a feminist foreign policy?
Well, thanks for this. As Sheena said, the feminist foreign policy is a tool toward achieving the holistic approach, really. So it shouldn't be an end itself. It should be a mean toward operationalizing this. And it could also be our pathway toward operationalizing the holistic triple nexus approach. Having said that, we must realize that no government in the world has really achieved a true feminist foreign policy yet. There are already elements in place here in the Netherlands and in 4 other countries. But what it takes really is a political willingness, long-term approach, the culture, and then the willingness to address root causes of inequality and unequal power relations. So in a nutshell, that would be the answer. And yeah, we might start the discussion around those lines.
Good call, and very interesting what you mentioned, that it should be a means to an end and not a goal as such. Thank you, Amr. We would now like to hear from you, the audience, about what you think about the feminist foreign policy, and we're going to use a tool for that, and I'll have Annika actually explaining what we're going to do next.
Yes, thank you very much, Davy. So in this part, welcome to our second block. We would like to hear from you, your insights and ideas on what opportunities a feminist foreign policy might offer us to break the silos that we're discussing today. For this, as Davy already said, we're going to use, I hope for most of us, quite a familiar online tool, which is Mentimeter. To start with, we would love hearing from you what you think are important elements for a successful feminist foreign policy. And to submit your answer, please go to menti.com and use the code 37354960. I also put it in the chat, but just to repeat, go to menti.com and use the code 37354960. Now, if you're in there, for this first question, your answers will appear in speech bubbles, and you can submit more than one answer if you like. So this is my challenge to you.
All right, we will have a look at the answers coming in.
I will have a look indeed.
Yeah.
And so far coming in already, oh, fantastic this is. Holistic approach, someone says, a gender transformative approach, inclusivity, intersectionality, realistic, well-resourced action plan is being mentioned, leadership has just come in. And this is a provoking one, but very justified as well. Language that normal people can understand and sign up to, because I have a feeling all of us are, well, a bit of junkies for this kind of topics here. Again, an intersectional human rights-based approach, assessing gender impact and security policy. And oh dear, I can't, wait, I can scroll down, fantastic. Meaningful participation, long-term commitments, honesty. That's a very nice one. Oh, yes, I'm back on my previous screen. Well, I mean, these are all, these responses are truly wonderful. I was wondering, our panel members, for you, are there elements that stand out? I was wondering, Hadil, are you still in the call?
Yes, I am. Hi, how are you?
Very well. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, most of the things mentioned actually stand up. They mean a lot, and they are elements of foreign policy as I see it. The intersectionality and the complementarity of these phrases is really what is a true feminist foreign policy is about. It's breaking silos, breaking power structures to be more inclusive, to be more decentralized and more sensitive to the context where it is practiced. Basically, a foreign policy that is maintaining the status quo or seeks to keep what's happening to maintain a global certain power balance is not going to function. And unfortunately, most of the existing foreign policies, even if some of them are declared as feminist, they still don't act in this way. They are not daring enough to challenge existing power structures and to challenge the status quo. So for me, challenging the status quo to be more humane and inclusive and diverse is key to any feminist foreign policy.
Very interesting points.
Yes, very, very, very interesting points. Thank you so much, Hadil. Lovena, are you still in the call?
Yes, I am.
Yes, I was wondering if any of these elements stand out for you as well, in particular from the practice that you work in daily.
It does a lot. Actually, the fact that we are the people, we are the grassroots, and we are seeing the contributions that women are making. It really it baffles me. I just wonder why they're not on the climate change discussion table. So my view is that even as foreign policy is being implemented, it really needs to factor in the local context, the way what my friend has just mentioned, so that it's not a foreign policy as it is, but it should be responsive to the needs of the common or the grassroots people. Over.
Yes, thank you so much for your response. I think then now we can go to our second mentee, and well, this is always a fun experiment, people. If I'm going to press this button, yes, we are now in our second mentee, for which again you can type in your answers and they will show up in these text box. And again, I think you can answer more than once. The question is, before I forget, how do you think a feminist foreign policy can contribute to breaking the silos?
Yes, we have the answers coming in. And it was particularly also interesting what Lovena said about how a foreign policy could contribute to actually making those connections. I see the answer coming up on the screen. What other answers do we have?
Well, so far, making connections and bringing more diverse people and issues to the table. Let me see what else. Critically reviewing the gaps. Bringing together, again, with regards to making these connections, bringing together different ministries and policies. What already was mentioned before, it should be inclusive and bring grassroots to decision-making table. Again, only if it leads to a more diverse leadership teams across all levels in society, government, business, knowledge institutions, etc. Provoking discussions, I like that one as well. Again, already mentioned in other discussions, but it's very good this point is raised here, by implementing a feminist informed system change. Let me see if I scroll down. Oh. It's always fun when you scroll and you see so many answers coming in. Intersectionality again, human rights-based approach, policy coherence is being mentioned. Well, I again would like to go to our panelists and wondering if Amer is still on the call.
Yeah, still here. I think... Yeah, echoing what has just been said, I think combining all the ingredients to drive change and working on a system change, just this embedding the belief that harmful gender norms can change, and leveraging this potential of change and gender as an agent of change toward addressing other issues and working on a holistic approach. I think that's the key message that we need to reaffirm.
Yes, thank you so much. Emma, I kind of wanted to ask you the same question.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of the answers that resonated with me the most is, you said, provoking discussion and feminist informed systems change. I think for me, feminist foreign policy can really break the silos by putting questions of sort of marginalization, equity, exclusion at the center, not necessarily as an add-on or something, a box, but really focusing the sort of whole question through that lens. And I think in a way that is, for me, really looking at the root causes, and that's really looking at how can we proceed in a more equitable, holistic way. And I think the feminist foreign policy gives us the lens to do that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. I saw one provoking thought in the chat just now. If I can pull back up my Zoom connection, that is, or my Zoom link. The computer isn't cooperating with me, but I think I know it on top of my head. I think it was Michaela who raised the point that, well, we will be sharing the results, by the way, of the Mentimeter with the audience, rest assured. And Michaela raised the point, well, I'm very curious about all of this, and please share. And, well, because all these elements, and there's no real feminist foreign policy yet, but all the elements are there. So when do you think we can finally really see a feminist foreign policy out there? Emma, can I stick with you?
Yeah. Well, I think we see certain examples of feminist foreign policy. So, for example, the government of Canada, the way that they
yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, the government of Canada provides a really good example of how they use a feminist foreign policy in the lens that they do all their sort of development work globally. So I think the question of when, I think events like today and the events coming in the next sort of weeks are bringing together all the actors and the momentum to push for this sort of change. And I think there are good examples, but it's actors like many of the speakers on this call today who are doing the work, who need to share the experiences, like the report that Leila mentioned, providing the evidence and the solutions and the opportunities to decision makers who are able to really decisively sort of action feminist foreign policies as a lens for their work.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Let me see if I can very quickly go back to the internet. My computer is no longer really cooperating with me, I'm afraid. So I have unfortunately no clue if there's anything going on in the chat at the moment. But maybe.
I find it very interesting, the answers that came in on a feminist system change and what Hadil just mentioned about how feminism should not only be a symbol, but also actually have a meaningful idea about it. Also, what Emma said about putting people in marginalized positions at the center and make sure that the policy works for them is a central element for for feminist foreign policy, as well as what was also mentioned in the Menti on policy coherence. And what I'm also particularly interested in is how or if a feminist foreign policy could also work on the national agenda. So having a feminist perspective on all different forms within the government. So thank you all very much for your contributions in the Menti. Before we head to our final question in the Mentimeter, I'd like to ask Willemijn whether she was able to follow this discussion and whether you could give a quick visualization summary for us in order to better understand what was just said.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you can see from the drawing, there's so many elements. I'm still writing furiously, drawing furiously. You'll see the finalized drawing after the event. But as you can see already, what is mentioned a lot are these holistic approaches, inclusive approaches, intersectional approaches. And what I drew down here was more diversity at the table and making connections and provoking discussions. And I'd like to add from what I am listening to is something that is not directly said yet, but which is in line perhaps with the more humane approach that was mentioned, is that it starts with seeing the other person. So I'm hearing a lot of listening, actually. Listening to who is at your side, who is at the table, who is in your society. So that is what is perhaps as a red thread underneath all of it. So I'll add that from my listening perspective.
Very interesting. And a crucial point about listening instead of designing something for someone without actually taking in their own perspectives. Thank you very much, Willemijn. We have a final question for the audience, but actually also for our panelists. We've come to a bit of a conclusion, and we would like to ask you, what is your main takeaway of today's session? It will be shown in your Menti as well. And I'd like to go to Hadil to ask you, what is your main takeaway from today?
Yeah, thank you. My main takeaway is really there are many voices that are not still heard well enough, and sometimes they are forgotten, and many times they are ignored, and sometimes they are not included, but for different reasons, not all voices are heard. And then the other takeaway for me is really defining the field where this foreign policy is made, practiced, and impacting. So all these fields, if they are not aligned, if they don't work together, if each other and informing each other, then nothing will change. And this takes me to the image that is still haunting me since January of the Syrian women, refugee women strangled at the borders in near Turkey, northern of Syria, heating the icy water, the snow to make water to cook and wash. And this is really the center of the essence, the center of the cause. Of how the three elements come together, reinforce each other. And when we talk about root causes and addressing it as a lip service, it doesn't mean much. But when you look at the real root causes, and you see whoever is damaging the environment is the same one who has a benefit from conflicts and wars, and is the same one who is abusing women, either in the household or in the economy, formal or informal economy. The root causes are there in patriarchy, and we tend, all of us, to close an eye on how patriarchy actually is affecting every and each aspect of our lives. And for me, this didn't come very strongly, and how feminism is anti-patriarchy. And that's really an antidote to certain levels, or so many of inequalities, injustices, and violence that are dominating our lives, and we don't address this root cause. So that's what I want to say at the end. My takeaway is really look at this very concretely, because whoever is causing, as I said, violence, injustice, and inequality is the same, and its manifestation. So conflicts, climate change, and many other things, corruption included. So that's why defining the fields and aligning them is the main takeaway for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adil, and a very important point you're actually stressing. Also, when it comes to meaningful participation, I think that's also what we heard in the beginning of this session in Leila's presentation, and make sure that it's not only a symbolic participation, but actually meaningful, also in constructing policies. Thank you very much, Adil. I'd like to ask the same question to Levena. What is your main takeaway from today's session?
Yeah, a few months ago, when we were planning here in Uganda, the government actually tasked us as Mexico and other development actors, development as well as humanitarian actors, to ensure that all our funding, when we are requesting for funding for our funders, include conflict, a component on conflict and peace. At that time, a number, most ingos were like, we are not in the peace sector, we are not doing this, we are in food security. So when you look at the nexus, when you look at the intersectionality between gender, conflict, and the climate change, actually, it now makes a lot of sense. That how I wish that all governments would actually just push for that. because if one side is limping, if there's no peace, then everything else that is done will actually be useless. But more to your question, my main takeaway is also that we have to talk. I mean, different actors in this have to talk, whether they are the people at the grassroots, whether they're people who are implementing, and also the policymakers. Because if other people are excluded from the table, then we will not be able to achieve this completion of the nexus. Over.
Thank you very much, Lovena, for that answer. And that sort of concludes it all. Like we have to keep talking. If we still have time, and we do, Amr, would you also like to raise your reflection on your main takeaway?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I'm unfortunate to speak after Hadil and Lovena have covered all the points, but just a quick reflection perhaps is that maybe now there's more and more of this realization that climate change impact is not confined to a single region. It's just a worldwide phenomenon impacting us all, whether it's Horn of Africa, whether it's Middle East, MENA region, and also the need to highlight the role of local-led solution and the culturally ingrained solution, especially those led by women and vulnerable communities. And just a very broad reflection that conflict is like the barrier that's preventing fragile and conflict-affected states from dealing with this climate change impacts. And the continuation of conflict actually impact and worsen the situation climate-wise and environmental-wise, leading to this vicious circle of vulnerability, and the humanitarian community is already stretched thin. So we need to work at the root causes now. It's here and now. There's no time to wait. Hence, this triple nexus approach can't be stressed more. Thank you.
Thank you, Amr, and very important points. I just wanted to go back to Leila, who was, of course, at the start of the session and has been listening to the discussion so far. Leila, could I ask you for a last reflection and your main takeaway as well?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Very rich indeed. And there are so many things that resonate with me. And I agree with everything that has been mentioned. But I would take away that, like, what really stays with me, that we need a human rights-based approach. Because when you think about it, there are different power dynamics, and it's shifting a little bit. We are talking about a lot that's shifting power dynamics from the north to the south, especially that when we talk about the powered resources, they are not shifting as much as the principle of shifting is shifting. And the thing is that there is no one size that fits all. We need to make sure that we listen to the communities we work with to make sure that we don't just understand the root causes, also we understand the specification of each single group, and then we design intervention accordingly. Sometimes the problem with international actors, there is a sense of disconnection between what is really on the ground and what is really happening in the designing and implementation is so missed that I have seen in the last 10 years. And that's why it's not just listening, it's actually including these groups in decision making. Aside from consultation, the problem is that we are stuck at consultation. We consulted with the community, we consulted with a group, but really they didn't really make a decision or contribute to the decision making. And also one last thing, and there is a question someone said that I still think about, is if we have all these resources and knowledge and efforts, why don't we have feminist foreign policy so far, or something like meaningful? And my question is, who's really deciding these policies? Who's really sitting at that table deciding whether we need one or not and how it looks like? And this is something also, where are the feminists from that discussion? Are really included or not? So this is something to leave you with. Thank you so much.
Interesting, and I truly hope that there are government representatives or maybe the minister listening to what you just said, because I think that's a very important message. I'd like to go to the answers online to see if there are any similarities or differences. I hope to get the Menti on the screen. Annika, could I give it to you because you have it in front of you?
Yes, thank you very much. I do have it in front of me. Thank you so much for all your answers. I see a lot of similarities in what our panelists just said. Everything is connected, a system change is needed, a tool for holistic, addressing root causes, hear the unheard, diversity, transformation is needed, working together, everyone counts, needs of best practices and lived examples, and the last one, momentum. I like that one, because there is momentum, definitely.
It's very interesting. Thank you everyone for also responding. Before I close this session, I'm wondering if we can take an overview look at our illustration. Just checking if that is possible, because I've seen some of it in our screen right here. Willemijn, this looks amazing and very, and summarizing it all, what we just discussed. Thank you for this. Would you like to say anything about it? Or?
I think let's stick with those last words that I just wrote down. Momentum is key, and that we keep all sharp on using accessible language, another thing that was mentioned, and that we keep on questioning why it is that we are still not there yet. So, yeah, I think a task for us all.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Willemijn. Very important point, and I'm happy that it's captured in the illustration as well. So, as I said, this brings us to the end of the event. I'd like to thank everyone online for participating and engaging online. Of course, to our speakers online, our panelists from all over the world, thank you very much for engaging. Of course, our partner organizations Mercy Corps and Oxfam Novib. And I'd also like to thank our people from Holland Park Media for organizing all the technique. Thanks everyone for watching. We will continue the discussion.
Such a waste. Looking on the city lights, flashing bright in